It is my immense pleasure to welcome our sponsor Nvidia to this afternoon session, Healthcare and HPC, It's a Growing Impact. Craig from Nvidia, EMEA, industry lead for artificial intelligence, healthcare and life science at Nvidia. I hand it over to you.
Hello everybody, welcome, and very pleased to be here and presenting at this event. So my name is Craig Rhodes, so I look after healthcare and life sciences for Nvidia, covering Europe, Middle East and Africa. So one of the major kind of pieces of work that I'm involved in is building up our kind of capabilities with our lighthouse organisations. And we'll talk about some case studies today. We'll talk about some of the areas that Nvidia is focused in and how we work very closely with our partners as well, such as Boston today. Thank you. So just to give everybody kind of a bit of an overview about Nvidia, I'm sure a lot of people have seen recently some of the announcements around the gaming. So, you know, if you don't know Nvidia, please go and ask your children or your nieces, nephews. They probably do know Nvidia from our gaming industry. But Nvidia is involved in many other different areas. Transportation, you know, we've got a very large autonomous driving group. We do a lot of manufacturing, as you can imagine, in the kind of robotics area, where AI is becoming more and more prevalent. And what I'm going to talk about today, which is the healthcare industry. And, you know, some people may not really have seen Nvidia in healthcare, but there's a lot of areas that we have been focused on for quite a long time, but a lot of new areas that are coming through as well. So it'd be great to kind of talk you through those. So when we look at healthcare, what do we see really as challenges? And obviously with the pandemic as we see it now, and you know we're kind of coming up to wave 2, and the kind of devastation that it's had across the world and continues. Some of these challenges that I used to talk about last year, probably even more appropriate now in the time that we're in. We're seeing obviously a massive increase in patient demand. You know, we're getting a lot more elderly patients, and we've got patients now with lots more multiple conditions, and that makes things, you know, much more kind of complex. You know, just, you know, being able to deal with the patients that we've got. If we look at COVID-19 and how the capacity of our hospitals around the UK, but everywhere else in Europe and the world, you know, how those hospitals were pretty much full to capacity with people with COVID-19. And look what, you know, the impact has that have been on other services, such as the oncology cancer services as well, where patients are now waiting for slots again. So, you know, the demands of the patients, especially when we're under a pandemic, are unprecedented now and probably going forward. Delivering new drugs, again, talking about this last year and the year before, how interesting it is now that, you know, most of the headlines from, you know, some of our great partners, AstraZeneca, GSK, and so on, all, you know, rushing to try and find that vaccine, and that's going to really support, you know, getting rid of this pandemic once and for all. But, you know, the complications of that, you know, the recent stop in the trial with AstraZeneca and Oxford, you know, taking stock, looking at the data, trying to work out what's the next thing to do. Previously looking at these types of drugs taking 12 to 15 years to market. It's a huge, massive failure rate as well, just because of the complexity of the data. Trying to, you know, really to understand, you know, what drug is really going to have the impact, what drug is going to have a positive effect, a negative effect, or no effect on the particular patient sets that they're working with. Limited expertise, you know, this is again one for probably the radiologist, but also a lot of the imaging side. But we've also seen here lots of stories about nurses as well and specialists. You know, there are not enough of the specialist teams, and there are not enough radiologists, not enough nurses. That we're losing these expertise, these experts in their particular field, so causing many, you know, causing challenges. getting more into the computational side, we're seeing enormous complex data sets now, 2D, 3D, 4D. Now we're starting to look at things like pathology. You look at some of the programs, Path Lake as an example, which is a large pathology program across Middle England and Northern Ireland. Going to be producing many pathology images. These digital images are gigabytes in size. So take hundreds of thousands of those, if not millions, and you've suddenly got an enormous computational problem. They're also very large. So from a GPU perspective and a memory perspective, this is complex stuff. So there are tools and techniques to enable us to be able to go through into those images and really to understand how to apply artificial intelligence to them. Delays and results, and again, we're talking about the headlines, whether it's patients' tests for COVID-19 more recently, but in general, how long these tests are taking. The regulation of technology, we've seen the adoption by people like the FDA for artificial intelligence start to really kind of look into this, but we need to streamline this. We need to get technology and the regulations working hand in hand to increase the speed of some of these artificial intelligence organizations that are producing these algorithms, these models, and getting these cleared by these big regulation technology organizations. We do have complex procurements wherever you are in Europe or the world. There are many different types. These tend to be very kind of time consuming and very complex as well. So this means that technology or activities you're going to do today, you're not going to start them for 18 to 24 months. And the world may have moved on an awful lot by then. So just some thoughts around some of the technology challenges. And let's kind of position Nvidia now in where we are in healthcare. So we've been working in healthcare a long time. We really started in the imaging side, where Nvidia is kind of known around their graphics cards. And you can see some similarities between Nvidia, what Nvidia is doing in the gaming industry, the visualization of data of the games, characters, what those characters are doing using artificial intelligence to understand how they're going to react, identifying objects within the game, being able to use those objects, understand what those objects are. Now translate those to the healthcare industry. Now we're looking at a radiology image. We're recognizing that this is a lung. We're recognizing that this lung looks healthy, apart from a part of the lung in a particular place. And we want to take that area that we may not know anything about it and be able to investigate that further. And so put that through a process of really trying to understand what is going on with that. So this idea around detection. So this is work that's been ongoing, and now Nvidia's more recently, and some work that I'll talk about later, is around our project CLARA, the work that we're doing. So Nvidia is known for their graphics cards, the GPUs, hardware, but we're also building software. So enormous amount of Nvidia's team involved in software development, not just the hardware. We're renowned for our kind of work in the community as far as the imaging community, MICI, RSNA, ECR. We're always involved in the challenges, love to get involved in those. Work very closely with people at DKFZ on some of the challenges that are coming up from MICI. And so really, really important for us is putting back into the community and working with the community on these kind of challenges. So very, very interesting. And we'll also talk about how we're also progressing in the areas of genomics as well, and natural language processing. So what's going on with the industry? So what's actually happening out there? So it's not just organizations, companies like Nvidia that we are focused on artificial intelligence. Pretty much every day in the news there's an interesting artificial intelligence story, whether that's food production, whether that's manufacturing, cars development, or whether that's in the medical world. And probably an awful lot in the medical device, and this is a massive area of focus for Nvidia. We've got a big team of people looking at medical devices. How do we utilize the GPUs that Nvidia produce? How do we embed them into these devices to make them more intelligent? We have really good partners like Siemens, GE, Philips, Varian as well. But also we've got a lot of new and upcoming partners like Huron in digital pathology. And a very interesting one, Oxford Nanopore as well. And Oxford Nanopore, you'll see down here on the left side, there's this small, it's actually a sequencer. And when we look at COVID-19, Oxford Nanopore right in the middle of sequencing COVID-19 and being able to translate that into positive and negative results very, very quickly to support the pandemic that's going on. So the work that they're doing with Nvidia is both embedding the GPU into their devices, but Nvidia is also helping to accelerate the software that they're developing as well for their devices, and that to enable you to understand the DNA sequence data that's coming from it, and then translate that data into something meaningful, a positive or a negative result that's provided back into the healthcare system very, very rapidly. So very amazing UK company that's right at the forefront of sequencing, right on the forefront of innovation and utilising artificial intelligence. And very, very proud to be partners with Oxford Nanopore, especially at this point in time. But medical devices, what we're seeing currently is this area of AI at the edge, so alongside the devices. But I think soon, and some of these devices have AI embedded. I think soon there'll certainly be a lot of these big devices, especially in the big medical imaging, the MRIs, the CTs, pathology, more and more AI being developed into these big devices and being able to intuitively produce data and then stream that data to the radiologist. Whether you're calling these kind of recommender systems, we're not replacing or looking to replace radiologists or pathologists. We're there trying to enhance the data that they're looking at so that they can make the best decision for the patient and ensure that that patient goes down the best clinical pathway for them. So a very interesting sector. There's another area that Nvidia is part of as well. So, the medical instruments is really interesting. So that's directly with our partners. We're involved in many engagement with end users, and some of those we're going to talk about today as well. There's this concept around called federated learning, and one of the really interesting aspects of artificial intelligence is its ability to start to recognize patterns and understandings from the data that it's looking at. That would take sometimes many thousand years of persons trawling through lots of data points and trying to understand it and join up that data. Artificial intelligence can do that very, very rapidly. And so we're seeing the application of this in different areas. So we're seeing this in the pharmaceutical industry. There's a consortium called Melody looking to introduce artificial intelligence into their drug discovery, looking at compounds and targets. But very interestingly, working with what some people would say is their competitors. So GSK working with AstraZeneca, Janssen working with GSK, Boehringer, etc. But all recognizing that they need to transform their industry. They need to help to accelerate how drugs come to the market and come to the market faster, cheaper, with less error rates. So by bringing together the data that they have in a very private way, using federated learning, they can start to gain insights that they would never have got before, but done in a very, very secured environment, managed very securely. And Oakin here, and we've got a slide again on Oakin coming up. Again, another fabulous partner of Nvidia's, a French startup organization, very much embedded in the federated learning and AI community, on managing this program of federated learning, closely collaborating with Nvidia on some of these technologies. It's an amazing kind of program of work where we're seeing AI, the pharmaceutical industry, their competitors, utilizing the latest techniques for drug discovery. And on the left side, and we've got medical imaging looking at this, and we're going to talk about the NHS, a particular example of the NHS, but there's lots and lots of other programs of work going on across the world, and there's one recently that's being led by our US team around COVID-19 and the NIHR. And this is a very, very important aspect where we're developing a COVID-19 model that's being shared across the world for looking at early detection of COVID-19. And they're doing this by getting organisations to pull in their own data and build their own models. And then these models are being consolidated, and I'll talk about that process. So this is one of our kind of famous flagship programs of work, and this is Seb Ortholin on the shaking the hands of our boss Yap outside of Guy's and St Thomas's. Seb is the one with the beard and the moustache. So he leads King's College London's. He's the head of health. So he's the head of health engineering, and he leads this program, very large program, federated learning, utilising artificial intelligence in a number of clinical pathways across a number of NHS trusts. This project started initially with 4 NHS trusts. So one of these, St Thomas's, which is behind. So Guy's and St Thomas's, South London and Maudsley, and King's College Hospital itself. But more recently, there's been an announcement that King's have also won funding for this to be more widely adopted across 11 trusts. So this is really, really revolutionary. So this will cover over 20 million patients. So the south of England. So a large, very, very large area that this will cover clinical pathways in neurology, oncology, and cardiology. So they're focusing on many different disease areas. Each of the hospitals will have an AI solution. They will have Nvidia's DGX technology. They will have the software layers on top of that will be built by King's and has been supported by Oakin and Nvidia as well. Nvidia's deploying their CLARA solution. And what's really interesting about this is this idea of federation. So what do we really mean about federated learning? So each one of these hospitals initially will be building these algorithms, building these models for a particular condition, let's say stroke, across all of those 4 hospitals, across all of those 12 hospitals. Each of those algorithms will then be consolidated into King's College London. They will be managing those that consolidation process, looking at the algorithms, looking at the data that was brought into them. But what you're not doing in that process, you're not moving the clinical data. So you're keeping that clinical data secured in the environment, in the hospital's environment. And that's absolutely crucial for this particular process. And it just means that things like ethics and governance process that do need to be adhered to can be overcome much more quickly, because there is the ability to be able to go through this process, ensuring these organisations know that this data is secured in their own environment. But the models are moved themselves. So the models contain the intelligence from those images without containing those the images themselves. So it's very, very crucial. As well as really kind of fundamentally showing how artificial intelligence really can be deployed at the point of care, working really with the clinical teams as well. This is one of these. This is not a research only program. This is driven by the clinical teams, by the research teams, by the data scientists, by the radiologists, and Nvidia and the partners such as Siemens, such as Oakin and Nvidia. And there's a startup community in there as well. There's Chiron, who's got a fabulous breast cancer model. You know, all of these organizations are working together to really try and make a real impact to patient care, driven by Sebastian and the team at King's College London, but also driven by the clinical teams. And, you know, we have to give a big nod and a thanks to the NHS for all the amazing work they're doing, us as well, all of the clinical teams and hospitals around the world that are having to deal with what's going on in our world at the moment. So, you know, massive praise to these guys. So this is, you know, one of the clinical programs. I've talked about Path Lake as well, around pathology. There's iCared in Scotland as well, with NHS Scotland, which is on a similar kind of track as well. All of these big programs are happening in the NHS today. They are all looking at how to support patient care, how to deliver data from artificial intelligence systems in a safe, ethical way. So there's a lot of interest in how do we do this? How do we not interrupt the clinical workflow? You know, how do we build it into the workflow so it produces better outcomes rather than interrupting the workflow? So there's many different things that we're looking at as far as this. So please go and look on that. Look up King's and these programs. They are fabulous. And just a quick note on federated learning, just to kind of visually describe how this works. So you've got a central organisation, which in the instance we're talking about King's College London, and then we've got the hospital institutions building each of their own local models. We were talking about stroke previously. Each of these 4 institutions then supply that stroke model back to King's College London, back to the institution, and then consolidates these models together. So, the kind of importance. Why is that important? Well, actually, what that gives you is you get a more demographically variable set of data. So you get the images for stroke, for brains, across East London to West London. There's many different population sets in there. The diversity in the image data that you might have, the diversity in the annotation of those images as well. You might have a specialist, a stroke specialist in one hospital, but maybe just a generalist in another. So you're getting different attributes on those images identified. So it's great that when you bring those models together to learn, you're using some of the intelligence and the specialities from these other organizations, which then bring together. And then when you provide that model back out, each of these organizations then being able to take some of those that speciality that they may not have in their organization and be able to reuse it for any new stroke patients that come forward. So really good for, our National Health Service has got fabulous teams in there. But you can see this in a very diverse maybe rural population if we go to places like India or China or so on, where maybe there aren't any specialities in those organizations. Actually, once you distribute some of these models, that could mean that you're certainly picking up aspects on these images that a consultant may need to send that image back to a city and have to wait for a particular diagnosis, or only have to use their own information that they have, or look on the internet. So this kind of process, this federated learning process, is looking very good. Not only within the NHS, but we're looking at trialing this elsewhere. We've got a test in the US that's happened recently in US and Brazil. There's some work going on down in Australia. There's other work going on in many other places as well. And this uses Nvidia's CLARA technology, which I'll talk about as well. So let's step forward a little bit further as well. So over the last couple of years, Nvidia was really one of the areas we've been looking at really strongly is this computational genomics. So genomics is really important. And again, when we're looking at COVID-19, if we can look at the sequence, the actual information around the disease COVID-19 and really understand that and look at the way that we as humans are built, our DNA signature, we can start to look at things like the vaccine. How's the vaccine going to react on our cells? How, if there is an adverse reaction, why is that? Is it because we're made up slightly differently to somebody else within that clinical trial? One of the challenges with computational genomics is the size of the data. Whole genome is very large. It's got a lot of base pairs in it. So from a computational perspective, it's very difficult to go through that and understand it. But then when you compare and contrast it to another whole genome and maybe thousands of others, that becomes a very big problem. So what we found recently with Nvidia GPUs is actually these computational problems lend themselves very nicely to Nvidia's GPUs. We've just released our newest GPU, the A100, within our DGX A100 server, and our other partners are going to be deploying that as well. And we found a big acceleration in whole genome sequencing for this. We acquired a company called Parabricks that does sequencing, whole genome sequencing, and we've now got whole genome sequencing down to well under less than an hour to analyze that data. And this is from a couple of years ago that people were talking less than 8 hours. And so we're always accelerating the process to really get the analysis of this data as fast as we can. And you can see as well, when you can bring in the imaging data, the genomics data, and some of your clinical data, this is when people really start to talk about personalized medicine. And again, you know, in this day and age where we're trying to understand, you know, the picture of somebody's lung and whether they have COVID-19, we want to maybe look at their DNA to see, you know, in future, which of the vaccines is really going to have a positive effect on this particular person. And is there anything in their past that we may need to consider? Are there any drugs that they're currently on that we also need to consider in that process to really kind of nail down which is the vaccine that we want to use? So all of that data, if we look at imaging data and genomics data and the clinical data, again, bringing those very siloed data sets together is a huge piece of work that we're going through. We'll talk about this program around mutagraphs with Sanger, but again, just kind of a call out to Oxford Nanopore there, a lot of work that we're doing with Santa Cruz and Harvard and so on. But we've also been doing a lot of work in the UAE, and we're doing some work with the UK Biobank and with some of our partners like Seven Bridges, like DNA Nexus, and some great work being done by the UK Biobank, and so many other aspects looking at this as well. This is one of the programs in the UAE, so I'd like to give you real examples. And Group 42 has got one of the largest supercomputers in the world delivered by Nvidia, and it's been powered by our DGX system, and it's called Artemis. And Artemis is now looking for genomics, so we're collecting the data from UAE citizens and starting to look at that. And actually, very fortunately, this was up and running and available for the UAE to start looking at COVID-19. So they're using this in the fight in the Middle East around the pandemic as well. So again, great work being done there. But they're looking for a Middle East reference genome, so that they can then use that as part of their precision medicine programs as well. Because again, us citizens around the world all share similarities, but there are of course differences, and we want to be able to understand those differences and push that into the programs, the applications that we're using to ensure that those differences are being considered when trying to work out what is it we're going to do, how can we help you, and so on. This is a proof of concept, but it's going to be more widely adopted with the Sanger. And again, this has just been released. And go on your internet browser of choice, go onto Google and go and search for Sanger and Nvidia, and we'll talk about this program called Mutagraphs. And Mutagraphs is a very interesting program. So this is looking at mutations in your DNA signature based on some of your historical lifestyle events. And again, this is very challenging from a computational perspective. It's a matrix multiplication challenge, very large matrices. And it's an area that the Sanger were using this in their science and using the tools that they had, and the period for the iteration period was about a month. So every time they wanted to start the analysis, they would go and click the button, and then a month later they got back the results. So this was reasonable for the size of data that they need to review and the process for reviewing that data. We at Nvidia, with some of our key genomics team, took this problem. There's a particular application that they use, and we optimized that application. Couple of months worth of work, and we get this now down to under a day. So this challenge from a scientific perspective that they were waiting 30 days for those results, they're now not even waiting 24 hours. So every day they can make a run, next day they get the results. So fundamentally changing how they're delivering the science, whether they want to deliver that science faster or they want to use more data to look at more insights. This gives them the ability to do that on a daily basis rather than on a monthly basis. So moving from 12 iterations a year to 365 iterations, depending if it's a leap year or not. So you can see that this is so important for science going forward, and again flow this into some of the process, some of the work that's going on at the moment to fight the pandemic and the disease. You can see why it's really important. The acceleration, optimization of some of these processes and applications can give you very, very good insight much faster. I've spoken a lot today about COVID-19, of course, and wouldn't want to present without talking about it. But just to say, Nvidia is doing a lot of work across the world in COVID-19. We've got a web page. You can go on that web page and see all of the work that we're doing. So please go on there. We're always looking for partnerships. We're partnering with many organisations, from pharmaceutical companies to startups, some fantastic startups in our Inception program who are building models and algorithms and deploying those. There was a lot of work and help that was done for in Italy with the hospitals in Milan when they were overrun with COVID patients. That work is still progressing. There's been a lot of collaborations across Europe and a lot of collaborations across the world, whether it's in China, the UK, or in the US. And these collaborations, they're not politically driven, and they're clinically driven. So go and look on the website, go and have a look at what we're doing, and we're always very, very interested to hear about work that's been done. And I've spoken about CLARA a few times, so I just want to quantify the work that's going on with CLARA. So CLARA is an application framework for imaging. So it's really a collection of tools that Nvidia is developing with our team. We've got a CLARA engineering team, fantastic team over in the US and over here in EMEA and over in Asia as well. And they're developing tools, working with our customers and our partners. So this is not something, a black box exercise that Nvidia is in doing and throwing over into the community. This is something that we're developing with the community. And it's been so important that we've actually now started a consortium with King's College London, DKFZ and other partners, and it's called, the consortium is, and we call the open source MONAI, and again, you'll be able to find that information. MONAI is the way that Nvidia can hand back to the community, and no more so than with the work that we're doing with King's College London, and being able to take these tools and hand them back into the community. These are around annotation, so being able to, in MRI, annotate the image that you're working on, looking at some of the model development and looking at the model deployment as well. So there's many, many tools that can help you. This is not a kind of a platform, a GUI interface platform. These are tools to hook you into the GPU environment, to get you to enable you to be able to use the GPUs in the most optimal way, but also to kickstart your AI program as well. These tools can really, really get you working fast in medical imaging AI. We've started our focus in MRI, but we're now starting in pathology. So again, I mentioned PathLake previously, and this is work that we're going to be doing with PathLake, but other organisations as well. There's some big organisations in Germany that we'll be collaborating on in this program as well. So very, very interested. It's on GitHub, and go and look for CLARA on GitHub, and go and look for MONAI on GitHub, and you'll find all of the tools there. And again, please get in touch. And so probably just to kind of end this talk today, and again, thank you very much, Boston, for allowing me to do this. We've got many partners and in healthcare. We've got many inception organisations that we're supporting in healthcare. We're really trying to accelerate, whether it's the application of AI at the point of care, supporting clinical decision making, supporting getting the patients onto the right pathway in the fastest and most appropriate way, ensuring that we understand the ethical boundaries and the governance, ensuring that we're bringing the clinical communities with us rather than isolating them. We're also very working very advanced with the drug companies, especially at this particular point in time. So right across from, you know, understanding the particular medical condition, to looking at how do we really diagnose that, how do we research that condition, to then looking into the process to create drugs for that particular condition. We are there looking across that whole spectrum, and we don't do this without partners. We don't do this without customers, patients, clinical users, and so on. So just to say thank you very much, and you can get in touch. Nvidia's got a healthcare website, and you can get in touch with us there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig. And we're now going to go on to the Q&A portion. So if you have a question for Craig, please make sure that you just pop it into our Q&A tool, and we'll get through them as they come in. So Craig, I'm going to kick off. You referenced the DGX A100, and I know there's been a lot of buzz around it since it launched a few months ago. Can you kind of summarize in a nutshell, what is it about this DGX that is so revolutionary?
Yes, hello everybody, thank you again. So I think it's kind of all in one. So it has, you know, our new A100 GPUs, it has all of the Mellanox capabilities, connectivity within there, but it's also not just the hardware, it's the software layers that are sitting in there as well, connections to the NGC, to our scientific applications. They're kind of ready to go. You know, the supercomputer we built at Nvidia with DGX A100s, which is one of the largest in the world, and it took us 3 to 4 weeks to stand that up. I think it's the second greenest in the world. So it's just the ease of getting this up and running. So where we've seen a really big uptake is within the research community and also the healthcare community that want to quickly get up to speed and just try things out very quickly, and this technology allows them to do it, allows them to connect to the software, utilize the hardware in the best possible way. So that it's the kind of ease of use to be able to do that, but obviously other partners will be utilizing the A100s and those great solutions as well.
Fantastic. And Boston are pleased to have DGX A100 at our Boston Labs facility. So if you visit our website, then you can find out more information about how you could book on to do some testing with that. You can do that guided by our Boston Labs team, or if you already know what you're doing, you can book in some testing and kind of be let loose. Within reason, I'm sure Boston Labs will say to me on the system. Around DGX, there's also MIG, multi-instance GPU, which might be interesting for some of our listeners. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, so previously with other GPUs, actually splitting the GPUs up and being able to use proportions of the GPUs for different workloads was possible, but it was somewhat trying. And what we realized with some of these larger GPUs was that the ability to carve them up and utilize different workloads across them was something that everybody was really interested in. And especially when we've got a large research group that might have quite a few researchers, they're all trying to do experiments, what they want to run applications, but they don't want to allocate a single A100 to a single researcher. You know, that's quite a costly way of performing experiments. So we've, in this latest kind of technology, a multi-instance GPU, we were able to carve up a single A100 into 7 partitions. and then be able to, you might want to do some training on 3 of them. You might want to be doing some inferencing on another, some annotation on another, and so on. So when you look at a DGX A100, and again, you should try it out with Boston. You can carve it up, and if my maths is right, 56 component parts for a DGX A100, whereas previously, say a DGX1, you got 8 V100s, or a DGX2, you had 16. Very difficult to put more than 8 people on there at one particular time. But now, obviously with the right workloads, you can then kind of separate them, and this also obviously gives a lot more people the time and the access to go and try things out as well. The other big aspect to this is utilization. So we also realize that actually these GPUs are very, very powerful. And actually you can't always find the most optimized application to utilize all of that power. And so that might mean you're running the GPU at a kind of a suboptimal way. So not only are you losing some of that GPU, but also from a kind of cost perspective, you're not making the most of your investment. So again, you're able to look at the applications, spread those applications across your GPU, and make sure that utilization levels are working right as well. And again, we've got some technology called Deep Ops, which allows you to look across your GPUs, making sure you've got them all tuned in at the right kind of levels. But then we also are starting to see software development partners that are starting to take advantage of MIG as well. So very interesting technology.